Mr. Chairman, my bipartisan amendment requires the Director of National Intelligence to submit a report to Congress on the funding of political parties and NGOs in former Soviet states by the Russian Federation and its associated security and intelligence services. As Congress well knows, a resurgent Russia led by President Vladimir Putin is once again determined to destabilize the West and various Euro-Atlantic institutions such as NATO. While we have seen the blatant use of military force both in Georgia and Ukraine, Russia has employed a variety of non-traditional methods to disrupt the West. These methods include the use of propaganda through state-owned media such as Russia Today, the manipulation of European natural gas markets, and the use of money to influence political parties and non-governmental organizations throughout Europe. In a recent New York Times article, authors Peter Baker and Stephen Erlanger highlight a series of instances in which the Russian Federation covertly funneled money to political organizations in Europe in order to influence various decision-makers and parties. While their ultimate goal remains the fragmentation of institutions such as the EU and NATO, Russia hopes to achieve incremental victories like influencing the EU's upcoming decision on whether or not to renew sanctions against them. As President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly and chair of the Assembly's U.S. delegation, I've had the opportunity to meet frequently with my European counterparts to discuss this issue. In all instances, Assembly members continue to validate and echo the concerns discussed here today. Only through an increased understanding can we begin to effectively plan and combat President Putin and a resurging Russia. I ask all of my colleagues to rise in support of this bipartisan amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition, even though I'm not opposed.
The gentleman is recognized.
I want to thank the gentleman from Ohio, Alabama, and New York for their amendment, which I am proud to support. This amendment requires the Director of National Intelligence to provide an assessment on funding of political parties and NGOs in the former Soviet states and countries in Europe by the Russian Federation and its security and intelligence services. Over the past few years, we've witnessed a number of highly visible aggressive actions by Russia, particularly in Ukraine. But Moscow's efforts to destabilize its neighbors are also subtler and more nefarious. Russia is sponsoring and funding political parties to groom the next generation of puppets, which they can control from Moscow. We must better understand what they are doing, even if what they are doing is buried deep behind the scenes. So long as sources and methods are properly protected, I support this effort. Again, I want to thank my colleagues for their work and urge support of the amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, as the chairman well remembers, with the Cold War, there was a time when the conflict between the United States and Russia was very tense. This amendment will help us bring to bear light on the actions of Russia so that we can make certain our policies reflect the new aggressiveness of the Russian Federation.
The gentleman will yield.
I yield to the chairman.
I really appreciate the gentleman. He's one of the most involved members of Congress with NATO, so I know that his concerns are valid, and I too share those concerns and would urge my colleagues to support the amendment. Thank you, gentleman.
With that, I yield.